Back in mid-2019, I moved to a new town for a work opportunity. At the time, I didn't have much money saved, so I had to settle for the cheapest apartment I could find. It was a tiny one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a rundown building. With only 4 units total, the entire place looked like it hadn't been updated in decades, and honestly, the area wasn't the best either. For the first 3 months, I was the only tenant living there. The other 3 units were completely vacant, which made things feel even more eerie, but it was only supposed to be temporary, just long enough for me to save up and transition into something better. Work turned out to be a lot more stressful than I'd expected. Late nights, overtime, and a toxic environment quickly became my new normal. I didn't spend much time at home except to eat and sleep. One night, around 8 p.m., I got home after an exhausting shift. I kicked off my shoes and headed down the hallway to my bedroom when there was a sudden knock on my front door. I froze startled. I hadn't seen anyone outside when I was coming in. Confused and still groggy, I made my way to the door and peeked through the peephole, but the glass was dirty or damaged. I could barely see a thing. Hesitantly, I opened the door. Standing inches away was a man, probably in his late 40s or early 50s. He had scruffy dark hair and stubble, but what really struck me were his eyes. They weren't comforting or kind, they were unnerving, almost vacant. "Do you live here?" He asked after a short pause, his eyes widening slightly. It was a weird question, but I answered without thinking. "Yeah." He gave me a forced grin. "I'm moving into the unit next to yours. Just thought I'd introduce myself." He gave a stiff little wave and walked over to the unit next to mine, letting himself inside. Oddly, he never told me his name. I assumed he was just a quirky, awkward guy and didn't think much more of it. In a strange way, it was actually comforting to know someone else was finally moving in. That night, I had a quick dinner and went to bed early, knowing work would drain me again the next day. The following evening, I arrived home around the same time. As I climbed the outdoor staircase, I saw the blinds in the unit next door move slightly as if someone had just peeked through them. It gave me an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. I rushed inside and tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself I was just paranoid. But no sooner had I shut the door than there was another knock. I sighed and walked back to check the peephole again. Forgetting it was still useless, I opened the door, already suspecting who it was. Sure enough, it was the same man from the night before. He smiled as if nothing was odd and asked, "Hey, do you know how the thermostat works in these units? I must be getting too old to figure it out." His laugh was light, but something about it didn't feel right. I gave him a quick explanation. It was an old thermostat with just a few buttons. Very simple. But he insisted he had already tried what I said and asked if I could come show him real quick. I tried to politely decline, telling him I was in a hurry. He pushed back slightly, still keeping a friendly tone but growing more insistent. "It'll only take 30 seconds. I'd really appreciate it," he said, playing on the fact that it was freezing outside against my better judgment. I agreed, hoping it would just get him off my back. He led me along the balcony to his unit. The door was already open as he stepped inside. I stopped at the doorway. The inside of the apartment was completely bare. No furniture, no boxes, nothing that suggested someone had moved in. The walls were stained and peeling, and a horrible odor poured out into the hallway immediately. I knew something was wrong. "Come on, it's right here," he said. Turning to look at May, hesitated, and he stepped toward me, his face shifting from friendly to something dark and unsettling. Without another thought, I turned and ran back to my apartment, slamming and locking the door behind me. Moments later, I heard my doorknob jiggle. He was trying to get in. He grabbed my phone and started calling the police. There was a pause. Then, he called out in a calm, friendly voice, "Hey, is everything okay? I just needed your help." I didn't respond. He knocked a few more times. Then silence. The police arrived shortly after, but by then he was gone. The officers checked the adjacent unit and confirmed what I had suspected. It was still officially vacant. He had broken in and had likely been squatting there for days, maybe even watching my routine, learning when I left and came home. There's no doubt in my mind that if I had stepped even a few feet further into that apartment, something terrible would have happened. I moved out as soon as I could. This happened a few years ago, back when I was still living with my parents during my final years before heading off to college. Around that time, my parents bought a new house and moved us in. It was way out beyond the suburbs, almost buried in the woods. To me, it felt like a mansion, huge, old, and kind of mysterious. Even though it was just the 3 of us, They said the extra space was for visiting family who stayed with us often. I think they just wanted the big house. That particular week, my parents flew out to visit relatives. They invited me along, but I didn't want to fall behind in school and deal with makeup assignments. So I stayed behind to look after the house. Didn't take long to realize I didn't like being alone there. The place was so big, with long hallways and empty guest rooms that gave off a weird energy. Plus, the house was over 100 years old, which made things feel even more unsettling. I tried to ignore it after all. I wasn't a kid anymore, but that uneasy feeling just wouldn't go away. For the first 2 days, everything went smoothly. I went to school, hung out with some friends, came home, and relaxed. On the third night, after getting dinner with my buddies, I didn't get back home until close to 7 p.m. It was already dark out, and I was tired. I wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed. I walked in, dropped my stuff by the door, and went upstairs. That's when I noticed something weird. One of the guest bedroom doors was open. I didn't immediately think something was wrong, but it made that creeping feeling return. I walked over and peeked inside. The room was just as I remembered: basic furniture, a bed, nothing unusual. I shut the door and shrugged it off. Still, something didn't sit right with me. My bedroom was at the end of that hallway, so I passed those doors constantly. I would have noticed if that one had been open earlier. I hated when doors were left open in this massive house. It felt like walking through a maze of black voids. Before settling in for the night, I did a quick check of the house. I didn't search every room, but I scanned for anything out of place. Nothing. Maybe the door hadn't been fully shut and just creaked open while I was out. That was possible. I went to my room, turned on the TV, and tried to forget about it. But the idea of being completely alone in such a massive, creaky house messed with my head. It wasn't that I thought something was happening, it was the unknown that freaked me out after about 45 minutes. I got hungry and went downstairs to make dinner. Another thing about that house, it was never fully lit. I had to walk past pitch rooms and dim hallways all the time. While in the kitchen, I kept thinking I saw something move in the distant living room. Each time I glanced up, it was dark and empty. I told myself I was just imagining things and did my best to ignore it. Dinner made, I headed back upstairs and froze. The guest room door was open again. That chill ran down my spine. I stood in the hallway, staring at the door, trying to make sense of it. Was the house haunted? I'd never believed in that stuff. But then again, I'd never lived in a 100-year-old house in the middle of the woods either. I walked to the door, gently pushed it open, and looked inside. Still the same. Nothing appeared touched or moved. I checked the floor for footprints or something disturbed it, but found nothing. Feeling more unsettled, I returned to my room, closed the door, and this time, locked it. I texted my parents casually, asking if the door to that room ever opened on its own or had some kind of problem. They replied quickly, saying they'd never noticed anything odd about it. I downplayed my concern and told them it was probably nothing, but deep down, I felt more anxious with every passing second. About 10 minutes later, as I was sitting on the bed eating and watching TV, I heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway. I froze, grabbed the remote, and muted the sound. Then I heard a thumb pried outside my dorm. My heart was pounding. I didn't move. Then came a soft, slow knock, just a gentle tap on the door. It didn't even feel real, so much so that I couldn't react at first. After a full minute of silence, I finally said, "Who's out there? I've already called the police." That was a lie, of course. I just hoped it would scare whoever it was, but the only response I got was 3 more slow, calm knocks. I realized I had no choice. I had to call the police for real. I gave the operator my address and explained that someone was outside my bedroom door. Just as I said that, I heard a loud scratch on the wood, like something sharp being dragged across it. That's when panic hit me full force. I begged them to hurry. The door handle jiggled violently, but thank God I had locked it then. Everything went quiet again. I waited in complete silence for 10 agonizing minutes until the police arrived. When they got there, the hallway was empty. Whoever had been outside was gone. The only sign they left was a long, deep gash carved into the door, clearly from a knife or blade. The officers searched the property, but there were just too many doors and windows. Many of them were old and had faulty locks. They couldn't determine how someone might have gotten in. There were no real clues, but my parents came home immediately after I told them. Nothing else happened afterward, but I never felt safe in that house again. Every hallway felt darker. Every creak and breeze put me on edge. About a week later, I thought I saw someone standing just beyond the tree line in the woods near the house. It was too dark to be sure. Maybe it was just a shadow. Either way, I'm glad we don't live there anymore. My parents sold that house a few months ago, and Whoever or whatever was behind that door remains a mystery. It was a pretty normal Friday night for me. I lived alone in a small house, tucked away in a quiet suburb, but I commuted over an hour every day to work in the city. Finally hitting the weekend, I was ready to do absolutely nothing, just relax, watch YouTube, maybe play some games, and sleep in after getting home. I took a quick shower, fired up my console, and spent a few hours gaming. I even opened a couple of beers. The night was going great. The only thing that could have made it better was some pizza, so I ordered from a local place through their app, and then laid back on the couch to watch YouTube. While I waited after about 45 minutes, I realized I hadn't gotten any updates. I grabbed my phone and checked the app. It said there was a delay. The message was generic, something like, "Sorry for the delay. Your order will be on the way soon, no big deal." I was planning to stay up late anyway, though my eyes were getting heavier than expected. I figured I was just more tired than I thought with YouTube playing in the background. I eventually dozed off. He was jolted awake by the sound of the doorbell ringing several times in a row. I shot up from the couch thinking, oh, the pizzas. Here, I had no idea how long I'd been asleep or how long the delivery guy had been waiting. Still groggy and slightly buzzed from the beers, I rushed to the door and opened it. A man was standing on my front porch. "Sorry, I hope you weren't waiting long. How much do I owe you?" I asked groggily. He looked confused for the pizza. I clarified, blinking hard to stay focused. That's when I noticed he wasn't holding anything. No pizza boxes, no bag, no delivery uniform. He wore dark jeans and a gray hoodie with the hood pulled up, hands stuffed deep into his pockets. He didn't answer right away, just kind of stared at me like he was thinking about what I'd said. Then he smiled and said not to worry. The pizzas were still on the way. Then silence. He just stood there looking at me like what he'd said made total sense even in my half-drunk, overtired state. I knew something about it was off. Why would someone show up to my door if the food wasn't even ready yet? But instead of questioning it further, I just mumbled, "Okay," and closed the door after a couple more seconds of awkward silence. Back on the couch, I rubbed my face and tried to shake off how strange that encounter was. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was too tired and a little tipsy to trust my own judgment. I put on a new video and continued watching only to fall asleep again. This time, I woke up to a quiet clicking sound. I didn't know what it was, but I was sure I had only been out for a few minutes because the video I'd started was still playing. I sat up and waited. No knock, no doorbell, just silence. I still didn't know what that click was, but suddenly I remembered to check the app for my order. I grabbed my phone and didn't even unlock it before feeling confused. The time on the lock screen said 4 o'clock. Amy had placed the order at 11 o'clock. That pizza place closed at 1 a.m. I unlocked the phone and saw the update. The order had been delayed once, then cancelled. So, who was that guy at my door? Feeling unsettled, I got up and slowly walked to the front door, checking the people. No one was there. I reached down to unlock and open it, but it was already unlocked. I realized I must have forgotten to lock it after the guy left. I'd been so out of it I hadn't even thought to check. I opened the door and peeked outside. Quiet street, no one in sight. I closed it again, but the sound the door made as it latched shut it was exactly the clicking sound that had woken me up earlier. My stomach dropped. I went pale as the realization hit me. That guy, he'd never actually said he was from the pizza place. I had assumed it. He just rolled with it. Lied to my face. What was he doing there? Something deep inside told me to get out. I crept quietly back through the hallway, heading for the couch where I'd left my phone. Just as I reached it, I heard movement from another room. I froze, then panicked. I grabbed my phone and bolted for the front door, flung it open, and ran down to the end of the street before dialing 911. Thankfully, the cops showed up within minutes. But of course, the guy was already gone. I told them everything, his appearance, what he said, every detail I could remember. But there wasn't much to go on, and they didn't find anyone nearby. Unless he comes back or something else happens, that's probably where it ends. But I think about that night constantly, trying to piece it together. Maybe the pizza cancellation was just a really unfortunate coincidence. Maybe not. But why would some random guy show up at my house at 4 in the morning, pretending to be someone he wasn't? My guess, he was checking for easy targets, looking for homes with no lights on, no cars, no signs of people awake. When I answered the door, he must have picked up on the fact that I was tired, distracted, and not thinking straight. He probably waited outside, listening to see if I locked the door. And when I didn't, he came back. If I hadn't woken up, or if I hadn't realized what was going on that night, could have ended very, very differently.